Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Thinking Like a Bank, where we show you how to think like a bank using the same strategies and principles that banks use to help you find more financial freedom in your life. I'm your host, Sarry Ibrahim. So for today's episode, we have a very special guest. His name is Terrell Turner. He's a certified public accountant and the host and creator of the Business Talk Library, a platform that was born out from a desire to helping struggling business owners. Terrell brings over a decade of experience from running Fortune 500 business segments to helping startups. Terrell, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have you on. Considering your background as a certified public accountant and what you do, I think a lot of small business owners and mid-sized businesses need to be more aware of certain ways to mitigate their tax liability. Of course, that could be a make or break for a lot of businesses is how they kind of run their taxes, especially with the help of tax professionals like yourself. Now, there's one particular credit I want to talk about. Before we jump into that, do you mind sharing with us some of your background and how you got into accounting?
Yeah, definitely. And before I do that, I just want to say, man, I love the name, Think
Thank
Like a
you.
Bank. It's phenomenal name for a show. I think
Thank
even
you.
just a great concept for business owners to grasp. Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I mean, I started my background in accounting and really started off in public accounting doing auditing. And, it was one of those things I always knew that I always thought that I knew that I wanted to go into some form of business. And I always say thought that I knew because, of course, when you're young and you're in your early 20s, you think you know everything. So I knew I wanted to go into something related to business. And when I just kind of survey, you know, I hear a lot of people say, hey, if you don't understand the financials of a business, then you're going to struggle trying to win in the game of business. So I was like, okay, all right, what would allow me to get that exposure? And so accounting became that thing. And then also auditing became, because I was like, what other way would they allow a young 20 something year old that knows nothing about business, has no real world work experience, actually get an inside look at how different companies are run? So I worked in auditing different types of companies and really seeing how they ran their business, and things that they did that were good, some things they did that weren't so great, and then also seeing how all that translated into the financial statements. And so then I moved on from there to start working for Fortune 500 companies, and I did several different roles, from working in finance and engineering to working in investor relations, which opened my mind to a whole new way of thinking about business, because there I'm dealing with Wall Street and analysts, and talking to the major banks and seeing how they thought about, they were investing, billions into the business that I was in, and just seeing how they thought about the business, what types of questions they asked. And I realized, what, they think differently about business than your average person. And
Yeah.
so I just kind of started using some of that mentality that I learned from them, and how I navigated through the next roles, and led a couple smaller business segments within General Electric, and worked for move to a tech company when my wife and I decided to move to North Carolina. And now I run my own firm, with really focusing on small businesses, helping them navigate the financial and the accounting side of their business, so they can confidently make smart decisions that are going to lead them to their desired outcome, as opposed to just kind of shooting in the dark hoping
Mhm.
it works out.
Mhm. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think a lot of small business owners are in that category of shooting in the dark. Um, I think what you take is more of like a strategic approach. And I definitely think that I like how you jumped into accounting to see more of the insides of a company, because arguably, like looking at a company's books is the furthest you can get into the business. Like you're seeing their DNA, you're seeing how they survive, how they live. That's the closest way to getting into a business. And even if I'm not mistaken, like accounting is like a story, right? Like it's like a way that you can kind of tell a story about the business, the owners, the employees, and how it's operated simply by looking at all the numbers.
Absolutely. I mean, I think once you spend enough time around financial statements, you'll be kind of like, I guess I call it like a master Jedi moment, to where it's like you can spend time looking at the financial statements like, oh, in a matter of a couple hours, I can tell you everything that's major about this business by really studying the numbers, because like you said, there's a story being told there. And if you learn how to interpret that story, you'll be able to have a lot of insight on what's going on with the business, and then also opportunities and risks that that business may be facing.
Mhm. Awesome. That's awesome. Now I want to talk about one concept or one credit. Sorry, it's the ADA tax credit, the Americans with Disabilities Act tax credit. And I seen this on I was reading an article. And I think I sent you the article too. It's about how some small business owners could use the ADA credit for to make their website more accessible, so that way they're in alignment with the credit or alignment with the law, the ADA law. And because they are, they can utilize that tax credit. Would you mind like elaborating on what this credit is and if it's possible that one could use it to make their website more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, just to give a little bit of context, I mean, with the ADA, I mean, the American Disabilities Act,
Mhm,
was when that was signed in. I mean, there are certain rules and regulations that they put in because the way some businesses were being run, and most businesses were probably unintentionally making it difficult for people who had disabilities to do business with them. Because I think for most of your business owner, especially a small business owner, they didn't have ill intent. They just didn't know.
mhm,
And so when that law came into play and they had to really start making their business more accessible so people with disabilities could, do business with them, or they could either come to their location, and as technology advanced, so that people with disabilities can utilize their websites. And so with that change, the reality is it costs money to make those changes. I mean, if you're going to make your business accessible, you're going to make your website accessible, there are some fees, and sometimes it's not a cheap expense. It's not
mhm,
a, hey, go in and press a button. There may be some consultants that need to be brought in, or there you may need to hire someone to recode some things on your website. And so with that, I think the IRS also understood. I mean, federal government understood that, hey, if we're requiring these people to incur additional costs, because as a small business owner, I mean, a lot of small businesses aren't operating with huge margins. So
mhm,
it's like we just put another cost requirement on them. We got to come up with something to help give them something back, or how do we help cover the cost? And the credit was one of the ways that they would do that. So kind of the way the credit works is, if a small business is, incurring expenses to make their business more accessible, and specifically in this context, if you're working to do stuff on your website where you want to make your website, able to be read by, I guess you say web readers or HTML readers. So for those that may be blind or visually impaired, or they may have some other visual impairment, the reader allows them to be able to hear what's on your website, so they can still navigate it. It makes pretty much kind of like an audible version of your
mhm.
your website. And so to do that, there's a few things involved. And so if you're a small business and you're spending money on these type of things, then the ADA credit could definitely be something that's available to you. Now, kind of the way the ADA credit works is, up to 50% of your expense can be taken in a credit. Now, there's a limit of that of up to $10,500. So your I guess the credit that you could probably qualify for is $5,000 max
Mhm.
in a given year. So now you can make, different changes to your website, in over multiple years, but in a given year, the credit limit is $5,000. And like I said, that would include, whether you got to get someone to code, whether you're bringing in contractors, whether you have to, redesign some of the things on your website. There is some eligibility for small business owners. Now, you also want to keep in mind, for small business owners, there are some, I guess you say, limitations for, if you're a small business that has $1 million or less in annual revenue,
Mhm.
then this credit can be applicable to you. Or if you're a business that has 30 or fewer employees, then this credit could be applicable for you.
Okay. And then so they have to have, okay, so it has to be a small business, less than $1 million in annual revenue, fewer than 30 employees. And then they could use the funds to oh, like for example, make their website more accessible, like SEO, or like like as you mentioned, making kind of like an audible version where there's audio parts for people with disabilities. Now, what else is there? Are there other requirements that a business has to meet to qualify for the ADA credit?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about, I guess you say that making your website more accessible, because federal government doesn't have like a strict, hard, fast rule of say, hey, this is what a accessible website looks like. Because when it comes down to website, you get into the area of marketing, there is a little bit of an art to it. It's not so much of a straight science.
Mhm,
So I would say when it comes down to, your website, making it more accessible, I would definitely say businesses that are, when you think about all the expenses that go into that, and, I typically tell my clients, we use this good faith kind of perspective. Like, if we can in good faith say, hey, this expense was incurred to help make this more accessible to those with disabilities, we can usually include those expenses.
mhm,
Now, Alex said, as far as the federal government is laid out, I mean, the $1 million or less in revenue, and then the 30 or fewer employees are the explicit criteria that they have laid out.
mhm,
Again, like I said, you want to factor in making sure that whatever expenses you're including,
mhm.
you're, in good faith, you can say, hey, yeah, I can support that this went towards making the business more accessible. Now, I would say also in addition to the credit, one of the things that business owners can do, because let's say if you spend more than the allowable amount for the
Mhm,
credit, you can also use a certain amount over that, up to $15,000. You can use as a current year deduction. So just because it may cost you more than the allowable limit to make your website accessible, so the IRS realized, like, okay, all right, if we're going to cap the amount of credit, we have to still allow you to be able to include all the expenses above that credit as a deduction. So the business isn't just taking a financial hit to comply with this. So you can do the credit, and then whatever's left over, you can also take that as a deduction towards expenses against income for your business.
And what is the difference between a credit and a deduction?
Yeah, so I mean, when you think about it this way, I mean, a deduction, or the way taxes work is, I mean, you're gonna take your income minus allowable expenses to get, hey, here's what your taxable income is, and then they take that taxable income number, multiply it by a tax rate to see, hey, this is how much you owe. Well, a deduction means that you get to include it in your expenses. So you'll take your sales minus your expenses. Well, if you have deductions, you lower your profit number.
Mhm,
And so your tax rate is multiplied by a lower number. Now, with a tax credit, which tax credits are a bit more attractive
mhm,
when it comes down to taxation, because what a tax credit does, it does a dollar for dollar reduction of how much you owe. Like in that example, we said, you take the income you had minus your allowable deductions to get what your taxable income number is, multiply that times your tax rate. And then they say, okay, all right, this is how much you should pay in taxes. Well, if you have credits, what then you do is you lower that tax liability number by the amount of credits that you're allowed. So a credit is going to give you even more financial benefit, which is why, like I say, whenever you're working through a business, it's like, if you have the option to take advantage of a credit will be more financially advantageous than a deduction.
okay, that makes a lot of sense. I see the difference now. Like, so for example, if you, in one scenario, if you owed $10,000 in taxes, the estimated, that's how much you'd have to pay. If you qualified for a $5,000 tax credit, you would essentially mitigate your taxes owed by half. So 10,000
Yeah,
minus 5,000, you would owe 5,000. But if you owe $10,000 in taxes and then you qualify for, let's say, $1,000 in a deduction, it wouldn't be 10,000 minus 1,000. It would be 10,000 minus the deduction times the rate. Am I correct
yeah,
about that? Mhm.
correct.
To lower, it would still lower your tax liability, but not as much as the credit would.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay, perfect. And in this case with ADA, you can use, if you qualify for it, you could use the credit, and then above the credit, you would use you can get up to $15,000 in a deduction. Um,
Correct.
and then in order to qualify for the $5,000 credit, you'd have to spend $10,500 on, like, for example, let's say the main focus is website edits and website accessibility. You'd have to pay, like, for example, a digital marketing company $10,500 that year in order to utilize 5,000 for the credit. Am I saying all this right?
Yep, that is correct. I mean, because one way to think about it is, the government has said, hey, the credit is there to help, we'll split the cost with you
Mhm.
up to a certain limit. So the government saying like, hey, we'll cover we know based on our rule, you have to spend this money because of us. So
Mhm.
what we're going to do is we're going to split the bill with you. And that's kind of how you can think about the credit.
Okay, perfect. So Uncle Sam is your partner. Okay. And what's cool is that when I was on your show, we talked about infinite banking and bank on yourself. And one thing that I'm kind of thinking about right now is something creative can be done for small business owners and mid-sized businesses, is that you could use the whole life policy that you have, the cash value that you have, you could borrow against that, and then even use that money to pay for, let's say it was website accessibility or other parts of the ADA tax credit, in order to get that tax credit and the deduction. And then you could do so from your policy, borrow against it. The policy keeps growing tax deferred. It would be a tax-free loan. And then you would pay that back on your own terms, and then kind of just have all these like cycling tax benefits on top of each other. Just something I wanted to kind of throw out there that business owners could utilize, since we do talk a lot about infinite banking and bank on yourself and the utilization of cash value whole life insurance, and the tax benefits alongside that. Now, Terrell, I want to kind of jump into more about the type of businesses you specialize in. Like, who are some of your target niches?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say before I jump onto that, one of the things I want to add to what you said, I think that's a phenomenal point. And I always also encourage people, I mean, as we move, further into technology where, voice and audio is definitely becoming a major part of how we run our businesses. So, when you're making your website more accessible and you're working, let's say you're working with a marketing agency to make, pretty much an audible version of your website, I mean, that's only going to put you in a better position,
Mhm.
as we move more into this voice activated, world, because when someone can pull up your website via voice commands, I mean, it just makes your business more accessible. And like you said, and if you compound that with the credit, plus you compound that with the strategy of, banking on yourself, and you compound it with, hey, the strategic marketing play of making your website, more accessible via voice, it's just like you have an all around advantage that you're adding to yourself, and you're funding it by banking on yourself. So I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I really like how you added all that together and kind of mixed it together. That's really smart. Yeah, it's a good point. Now, which states do you help clients in? Do you
Yeah, so the good thing about, our firm, I mean, like I said, we focus on small businesses, and our core is working with restaurant owners, kind of bakeries, and kind of food truck owners. That's where, our core of our practice is. And, because we can do it remotely,
Mhm.
we can work across so many different state lines right now, or focus on the US. But anywhere in the US, because technology has allowed us to be able to leverage, to do the accounting remotely, as well as when we get into financial planning and kind of like the more so the financial forecasting, as like, hey, we want to make, this much profit. Well, where do your prices need to be? What do we need to do on cost of goods sold? Like, how do we kind of strategize that and identify what are the right levers that
Mhm.
you need to pull to be able to execute the financial strategy for, to achieve your financial statement goals that you have. So we work across the board. And then also, like I said, because of technology, we can bring into play, when we're working with financial advisors and financial consultants like yourself, to where that can happen remotely, where we can connect our clients to the right people to help them really get a well-rounded financial solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in today's age, definitely everything is pretty much remote, and it's easy. I think it's even more advantageous for clients to do everything remote too. Like it's not a you don't have to meet with people face to face anymore. And besides too, like for example, if somebody's in Chicago, they can reach out to you, and you'd be able to help them out. So they don't have to. They could you're an awesome accountant and an awesome professional, so they could utilize your services that way. I want to I kind of have a couple more questions. Um, are there other deductions and credits that business owners could use, small business owners could use, especially in the types of business you help with, that are similar in the sense that they could use for technology or digital marketing, that could help grow their businesses and be more competitive, but also get those tax advantages?
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of different credits, and I will say, I mean, there's probably a vast list that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. And so even for myself, even though I am a CPA, one of the things that I do is I partner with other firms that where all they do is focus on tax credits.
Mhm,
Like for example, like several businesses, the R&D tax credits that
mhm,
are available. I partner with them to where my clients, if I'm working with a client that needs that, then I have that relationship to forward them to them, because tax credits are, there's more than people realize that are out there. So
mhm,
I think that it's always advantageous to talk with someone who specializes in tax credits. And I
mhm,
think when it comes down to, when it comes down to small businesses and it comes down to deductions, I mean, the way I like to tell them to think about it is, what legitimate expenses are you incurring to run your business? I mean, whether that's, your travel time, whether that's the use of your home. Even for myself personally, with working from home, one of the things that, we're doing at my home is we're building out an office space above my second floor of my garage, to where it's just like, normally, if I would have just done that as just a personal expense, hey, I would have to cover the cost.
mhm,
But being that, hey, it will be used exclusively for my business,
mhm,
it allows me to leverage increasing the value of my home, at the
mhm,
same time of being able to incur a legitimate business expense. So I always tell people to consider those things of, what are you legitimately spending money on to actually grow your business, and how do you work with your accountant to make sure that that's accounted for as a business expense.
Okay. And I think with accountants, right? It's like usually like some accountants specialize in credit and and then most accountants specialize in deductions. Is that right? It's like it's not the same, usually the same worlds within those two areas.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, you have your some accountants that focus, like, general taxation, as far as, helping you get things filed. And then you have some that are, very specific to tax credit, because, some of the rules around tax credits can be very, very deep. And then you may have some that are focused on, state and local taxes, to where, each state and has, the authority to set their own state tax rules,
Mhm,
because the way taxation works is you have the federal level, which is probably what you hear about the most. Like if you hear about a new rule coming out of Washington, D.C., or you hear about, a senator or a congressman talking about a tax rule, they're usually talking about the federal level. But then you go down to the state, each state has the authority to set their own kind of state
mhm,
taxation. And then even more down to the county level, each of the counties may have their own authority to set, sales and use taxes.
mhm,
So taxation happens at multiple levels. And so you want to make sure that, like I said, that you pretty much you have the right team of people, that you're asking the right questions. Because if you're talking to someone that only deals with federal, then there may be, some state and local tax credits available to you that they don't know about, because they only deal with the federal. So you want to make sure you look at your tax scenario in the multiple layers of federal, state, and local level.
Definitely. And this is what probably like you've seen this probably in your experience with larger companies. It's not like there's just one CPA. There's probably like numerous, probably in-house and out of house, right? It's like they work, some of them work directly for the company as W-2 employees, and then some of them are also on the outside as like, outside accounting firms, and they all play a role in credits, deductions, all these different methods of saving the company on taxes, right?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Because even when I think about, one organization or a type of organization that does it so well are banks. I mean, banks have layers of financial people in those areas because they know that there's so many layers to their business. And so one of the things a tip that I give small business owners is, if you're going to work with a CPA, it's very well within your rights to ask them, hey, do you have someone on your team that does state and local tax, or do you have a contact? Because I like to let my clients know, like, hey, for me to provide you with the best solution, hey, here's who I call when I have, state tax questions, or letting them know that, hey, I have people that I can reach out to, because there's too much for one person to consume. And there's too much for, if that firm doesn't have people in-house, it's do they have relationships with other firms that specialize in those areas to make sure that you're getting a quality answer and a quality solution.
Nice. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Um, as we're kind of winding down now, I really appreciated you to sharing your expertise and just having and talking to you again. If somebody, for example, is a CPA, they work at a company and they want to kind of follow in your steps, they want to branch off and start their own business. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I would say appreciate the fact that you have had the technical experience, but also respect the fact that you may not have had entrepreneurial experience, because there is a difference between, practicing the technical side of your craft and then running a business in that field. And I tell, a lot of accountants and, corporate finance individuals that, like, when it comes down to my business, I probably spend maybe 40% of my time actually doing the technical side. The other 60%, I'm running a business, which means like the marketing, the sales, the client follow-ups, business development. Like, if you're going to go into a business, and just like any other small business, there's more to it than just your technical craft. So I would say just, appreciate the fact that you have the technical experience, but spend some time actually getting to know the other aspects of the job. And one of the things that I did before I left my full-time job is I actually set up a lunch and some phone calls with people who were in a full-time CPA firm, people who had left their corporate career to do their own firm. And I would just ask them, hey, what were some of the things that you had to learn that you didn't when you were in corporate? And they would start pointing out things like, hey, I wish I would have spent more time doing this and doing this. And I started asking them those questions probably, a few months before I actually left my job, so that if there was something that they pointed out, or like a skill set that I needed to learn, that I still had a little bit more time in my corporate job to say, okay, all right, how do I put myself in a position to do that, to learn that? So when I leave this corporate role and I go into my own firm, that, hey, I'll at least be able to have some reference point to say, yes, I have that skill set. And that's been huge for me, because that's actually how I've won a lot of my clients, is just being able to point to when they ask me a question, or they're like, hey, this is the problem we're dealing with. And I can point back to say, yep, I helped such and such company actually work through something like that. It gives them more confidence that I'm the right person and that my firm is the right firm for their business.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, man. How can listeners reach out to you and connect with you and follow you?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the best ways I say that for people to follow us, you can go to our firm website is TLTurnerGroup.com. And therefore you'll see like all the firm services we offer. And then also, because I also founded the Business Talk Library, which is a massive content and course on demand course creation. you can go to businesstalklibrary.com, and there you can see all the great content that we're doing there, from, the finance and accounting show. We also have the food and finance show, where we're diving deeper into the business side of food industry. And you can see that information. We also have, the Business Talk Library, Charlando Negocio, which is the Business Talk Library in Spanish. You can check that show out on the website as well. And then for those that are in the professional field, we have the Business Talk Library Careers, where we have a host that hosts that show, where he dives into, hey, career strategies and different things that, he and others have learned along their career journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terrell, for joining us. I'm looking forward to hopefully having you back on the show, probably be back on your show, and hopefully reconnecting with you.
Absolutely. Hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. To learn more about what we do and how we can help you grow more wealth, please visit www.finassetprotection.com. That's FIN, assetprotection.com. The topics presented in this podcast are for general information only and not for the purposes of providing legal, accounting, or investment advice. On such matters, please consult a professional who knows your specific situation.